Hey Optimancers, Chris here. This is my second go-round recording a video for the Paladin in Playtest 6. My original video was going to be an hour and a half, and I spent half that video talking about the new Paladin Smite feature and going over all the related spells. So I decided instead to make two videos. One going just over that feature, which I released last week, but I'll link it up above for you. And this one, where I go over the rest of the base class, the subclasses, the Find Steed spell, and compare them to the 2014 version, as well as the playtest Paladin from the 4th playtest. Then I'll do a little damage comparison at the end, and compare the Paladin to some of the other playtest classes. Now, whenever I do that, I get some commenters who say things like, you could have made that build better, or level 13 is just some random level you chose, and different levels could yield different results, or you made assumptions in your calculations that could be wrong. And to those commenters, I have just one thing to say to you. Yeah, it's one data point, a snapshot, with unavoidable assumptions required that could be very well wrong, and I certainly can't draw any sweeping, comprehensive conclusions from the information from that math. Neither should you. Might give you an idea, though, as to how things are fitting together. That's what it does for me. So I'm going to refer to Playtest 4 and Playtest 6 a lot. Playtest 4 was the first Paladin playtest. I believe that was called Unearthed Arcana 4 Druids and Paladins. And Playtest 6 is the most recent one. So the first things that struck me, looking at the new class chart, is that the Playtest 4 Paladin had Divine Cantrips. Those have been removed. And Channel Divinity has fewer uses than Playtest 4. In Playtest 4, the Paladin got 3 uses at level 5, and then 4 uses at level 9. Now they don't get 3 uses until level 11, and they never get 4 uses. So that means at almost all levels, this Paladin will have fewer uses of Channel Divinity than they did in Playtest 4. And there's even a couple levels where it has half the uses. That is a pretty big nerf. Keep in mind, though, that the 2014 Paladin gets 1 Channel Divinity and it never goes up. And one thing I've learned in these playtests is you can't just read the design notes to know what the changes are. The design notes highlight some of the changes, but things like this Channel Divinity number, which changed a lot, isn't mentioned at all. The proficiencies, armor training, and hit points are all the same as the last playtest, as well as the 2014 Paladin. So let's start with Lay on Hands. This is an iconic Paladin feature. The 2014 version gave you a pool of 5 points of healing per Paladin level, and you could expend them as you like with an action. And if you spend 5 points, you can also cure a disease or neutralize a poison. In Playtest 4, Lay on Hands was basically the same, minus the curing of a disease, which designers have told us is going to be handled through the poison condition from now on. So really, it wasn't changed at all. Here, the Paladin has gotten a fairly major upgrade. In Playtest 6, the Paladin's Lay on Hands feature is the same as before, except now it only requires a bonus action. Paladin players, I think, are going to love this. Sacrificing that action to use Lay on Hands has always been something the Paladin player has been super hesitant to do, because you give up all your attacks, and you're a Paladin, attacking is what you do. Now, they can combine Lay on Hands with an attack action, and I expect that is going to be very positively received. So with spellcasting, the major change from the last playtest is, and this is no surprise, they've abandoned the spell slot-based spell preparations and replaced them with the static number in the class chart. And they've done this with all the classes now. This is obviously the new direction, so we expected this. The number of preparations you're going to end up with here is going to be pretty similar to your typical 2014 Paladin build that used their Charisma modifier plus half their Paladin level to determine spell preparations. The set amount goes up at a pretty similar rate to what you would expect. One change here, though, that was a little surprising was the changing of prepared spells has an additional restriction added. Paladins have always been able to switch out any of their spells after a long rest. Now it specifies that only 1 prepared spell may be changed, so it's a little bit more restrictive. Though I don't expect that restriction to be a problem because, in my experience, Paladins tend not to change out their spells very often anyways, and even if they do change out a spell, they're usually not changing out their whole list or anything. And so I don't expect that most players will even notice this change. Then at first level, the Paladin is going to get Weapon Mastery. This provides the Paladin mastery in 2 weapons of their choice, and they can switch out their selections after a long rest. There's no restriction on the type of weapon selected, though my expectation would be that most paladins are going to be grabbing martial melee weapon masteries, which have the choice selections like graze, push, and topple. According to the design notes, removing divine cantrips was kind of the trade-off for gaining weapon mastery, and in my opinion, that is one steal of a trade for the paladin. This is a significant upgrade to having cantrips, in my opinion. The next feature is Paladin Smite. I had so much to say about this that it got its own video, but the short version is that Divine Smite is a spell, and Paladin Smite is a feature that is much bigger than that one spell. Divine Smite is worse than it used to be, but Paladin Smite as a whole, I think, is way better than just getting Divine Smite. It's flexible and cool, and I really like it, except for Banishing Smite. Banishing Smite is trash. They need to redesign it, and it's unfortunate because they had gotten it right in Playtest 4, and they seem to have gone away from that, and I'm not sure why. But hopefully they fix that up. Otherwise, I love this feature. Let's move on. At level 2, the Paladin gets their fighting style. That's the same as in 2014. And the options have reverted to the 2014 Paladin options. In Playtest 4, they could choose any of the fighting styles. I also noticed that one of the fighting styles has changed, and that's protection. So in the previous playtest, they had an altered protection that allowed the character that had the feat to use their reaction after a target other than them was hit to impose a -2 to the attack, potentially turning that hit into a miss. And now it's reverted to the old version, which is use your reaction before the attack to impose disadvantage, which I don't think is as good, and I don't think anyone really liked this one. I never see anyone take it, so I'm not sure why they're going back to this old version. I guess maybe the new version didn't get the reaction they were hoping for. So Channel Divinity is gained at level 3, and just like the last playtest, you recover one use after a short rest, and all your uses after a long rest. But as I said before, you do have fewer uses now at most levels. Divine Sense here is the same as Playtest 4. You use a Channel Divinity, you can detect Celestials, Fiends, and Undead within 60 feet for the next 10 minutes. This is a fair bit better than the 2014 Divine Sense, though that version didn't use a Channel Divinity. It had its own resource pool. So at 3rd level is subclass selection, then you get your ability score improvement at level 4, then you get extra attack at level 5, and also at 5th level, we're going to get Faithful Steed. So this is just like the Playtest 4 Paladin, where they automatically have the Find Steed spell prepared, and they can cast it once per long rest without expending a spell slot. Of course, if they do it that way, it will automatically be cast at its lowest level. So if you want to upcast to get the improved stats and eventually the fly speed on your mount, the Paladin is going to have to expend the slot for that. Now we have some great news here. This is now a Paladin exclusive spell, which means no longer are you going to have clerics casting Find Steed and upcasting it and getting, the Flying Steed before a Paladin could even do so. And so now this is a Paladin thing. Great. Now, the Find Steed spell's a pretty long spell. There's a lot of text, and then there's this big stat block. But the quick version is that we had the Find Steed spell printed in Unearthed Arcana 4, Playtest 4, and of course it was quite changed and used a template, and I think it generally had positive feedback from the community, and then it's reprinted here, and I decided, despite it being long, I'm going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, look for any differences, and I'll tell you something, I sure found a pretty big difference, and I don't know if you've heard about the big change on Find Steed, but I'm going to let you know about it. Now, for the most part, it's the same. I mean, there's a couple wording changes, like Otherworldly Maul is now called Otherworldly Slam, but it's the same feature. With the phase step, it used to just say that the steed could teleport 60 feet. Now it says it can teleport 60 feet away from itself, I guess in case you were wondering whether it was 60 feet away from the paladin or the steed, so they're clarifying that. That's fine. But check this out. Here's the original version, and looks a lot like the version that you would see in the player's handbook. 2nd level, 10 minutes, range 30 feet, components verbal, somatic, duration instantaneous. And then here's the new version. Bam! Casting time. Action. What? That means that we can cast Find Steed in combat now. That is a huge change. and a massive improvement. I'm all on board for this. Now, there are much more minor changes to aura protection, but a couple little notable things. So, in the last playtest, they had moved aura protection to 7th level, and now it's back at 6th level, so now it's back to where it was in the 2014 Player's Handbook. And in the last playtest, you kept your aura protection even if you were unconscious, and you lose it if you're unconscious in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Now you're going to lose it if you're incapacitated, and I think that's reasonable enough. Now, in my opinion, and this isn't necessarily going to be popular because I know whenever I say something is maybe too powerful and should be toned down, that's not always the most popular thing to say in a YouTube video, but aura protection, I think, is a little too powerful. I think it's more powerful than anything any other class gets at this level, and don't give me 3rd level spells. 3rd level spells are great, but 3rd level spells are not always on. This is a 10-foot aura that is always on, that gives you and allies in that aura a huge bonus to every saving throw. If there was a 3rd level spell that did this, I would take it on every character as my first choice. And I do think this is just too much for 6th level, but I'll say this. If they print it as is in the 2024 Player's Handbook, at least it's not any worse than our current version, but I do think I would be all for a little bit of toning down here, like have it use your reaction to get the bonus or something. But if they leave it as is, I can live with it. 7th level, the Paladin gets a subclass feature, then an ability score improvement at level 8, and then at level 9, Abjure Foes. So this was also in Playtest 4, and it gives the Paladin another use of Channel Divinity. The Playtest 4 version used a Channel Divinity and was activated with a magic action. The Paladin could target a number of creatures equal to their Charisma modifier that they could see within 60 feet, and those targets made a Wisdom saving throw. They became frightened and dazed on a failed saving throw, or just dazed on a successful one. And these conditions lasted for 1 minute, or until the target took damage. So that feature I figured was too powerful. And they did nerf it here. So there's no effect on a successful saving throw now. So if they make their save, nothing happens. Though I do still think this is a very powerful feature. Aura of Courage is now 10th level again. It had been pushed to 13th level in Playtest 4. Unlike the 2014 version, if a frightened creature enters the Paladin's aura, they're no longer frightened while they're in the aura. I mean, as long as they're your ally. This is functionally the same as the buff the Playtest 4 Paladin's Aura of Courage had. At 11th level, the Paladin gets Radiant Strikes. In the 2014 Player's Handbook, it's called Improved Divine Smite, but this is the same as the 2014 version, except unarmed strikes also get the boosted damage. In the Playtest 4 version, ranged weapons got the benefit. Now there's a little tidbit here that a lot of players might not know. So for most Paladin stuff in the 2014 Player's Handbook, you're basically restricted to melee only. And then there's a couple spells like Banishing Smite or Branding Smite where you can use a ranged weapon. But the 2014 Paladin's Improved Divine Smite is one rare exception where it works with thrown melee weapons, and this one does as well. At 14th level, Restoring Touch used to be called Cleansing Touch in the 2014 Player's Handbook. The old version required the Paladin to use their action, then they touched the target, and the feature ended a spell on the target, and it had its own resource pool equal to the Charisma modifier of the Paladin. Now Restoring Touch is kind of a scaling of Lay on Hands, allowing the Paladin to spend 5 points from their Lay on Hands pool, and they can use it to remove the blinded, charmed, dazed, deafened, frightened, paralyzed, or stunned condition. It's basically mechanically the same as the first level option to remove the poison condition. It's just that at this level, the Paladin gets a whole lot more options for conditions they can end. And there's not much more to the base Paladin. Level 15 through 20 just have subclass features, ability score increases, and the expansion of the aura to 30 feet at 18th level, which is very good, but not unusual. We're used to that. It's the same as the 2014 Paladin. So let's look at subclasses, and the Oath of Devotion was a subclass we had in Playtest 4, and it was pretty powerful. Here we have another revision, and of course one of the changes is going to be return to the 2014 subclass level progression. So the first change is a pretty big change from Playtest 4. In Playtest 4, the Paladin could cast one of their Oath spells for free, of any level they could cast. That has been removed, and that's a substantial nerf. Beacon of Hope and Dispel Magic at level 9 used to be Aura Vitality and Blinding Smite, And this makes sense because Blinding Smite is an automatic preparation now. Freedom of Movement at 13th level replaces Staggering Smite, same thing. And otherwise is the same spell list as the last playtest. Sacred Weapon got a big improvement in Playtest 4 by making it a bonus action. It was an action in the 2014 version. Also, remember there was only one channel divinity use in the 2014 version, or at least per short rest. The change here from the last playtest is now you can only use this on a melee weapon. Even the 2014 version didn't have that restriction, so they are going all in on paladins and melee. I should mention that the 2014 Devotion Paladin could also use their channel divinity at level 3 to turn fiends and undead. The design notes let us know that these kinds of features were basically replaced with Abjure Foes, which does the same thing, but to any kind of creature. Now, they didn't replace the feature with anything else, so you're only getting Sacred Weapon at 3rd level now. But I think the idea is Sacred Weapon is better here than in the 2014 Player's Handbook, so maybe that's the only feature you need. The Aura of Devotion at level 7 makes you and your allies in the aura immune to the charm condition, and unlike the 2014 version, a charmed ally that enters the aura isn't affected by the condition as long as they're there, so it's like Aura of Courage that way. In the last playtest, the Paladin didn't get the Aura of Devotion until level 10, so getting it a lot earlier is very good. At 15th level, the 2014 Devotion Paladin is always under the effects of a Protection from Evil and Good spell. Here, the Devotion Paladin gets an additional effect whenever they cast any of their Smite spells. You and your allies in your aura get half cover until the start of your next turn. That's a +2 armor class. Now, obviously, in the right conditions, Protection from Evil and Good is more powerful than that. I think what they've done here, and I would agree with it, is they've made it so it's far more broad. You don't have to be fighting a certain kind of creature to benefit from your 15th level feature. Paladins are going to smite, and when the Devotion Paladin smites, they get an additional benefit. I think that's just fine. And I should note, this works with all of your smite spells, not just Divine Smite. And then at 20th level, the Capstone, Holy Nimbus. The 2014 version was an action to activate. Now it's a bonus action. Otherwise, it's very similar. You get an Aura of Sunlight. Enemies starting their turn in your aura take damage at the start of their turns. Used to be a flat 10 Radiant. Now it's your proficiency bonus plus your charisma modifier, which is probably going to be 11. And you have advantage on any saving throw forced on you by a fiend or undead. That used to be limited to spell saving throws, so that's been improved as well. Finally, this version allows you to do Holy Nimbus again by expending a 5th level spell slot. So the Oath of Devotion has had a number of little improvements over the 2014 version. Not sure it's as powerful as the Playtest 4 version though, but the biggest buff here is probably the bonus action Sacred Weapon. The next subclass is the Oath of Glory. This was originally introduced in Mythic Odysseys of Theros, then it was reprinted in Tasha's, and if I recall, I don't think there were any changes in the reprint, but let's see what changes we can find here. So the Oath spells are the same, and it's a fair list, but one item of note would be the 2014 Paladin can't cast spells with the ritual tag ritually, but now they can. So Commune looks a whole lot better on this list now because the Paladin is going to be able to cast it without expending a spell slot. The Oath of Glory has 2 ways to use their channel divinity at 3rd level. This is the same as the 2014 version. Inspiring Smite allowed the Glory Paladin to use their channel divinity as a bonus action after dealing damage with Divine Smite to provide 2d8 plus their Paladin level in temporary hit points to themselves or distribute them amongst allies within 30 feet. And the feature here is basically the same, except the bonus action is no longer required. Because, of course it isn't, since the Smite now is using your bonus action. One nice benefit here is you can apply the feature after any Smite spell, not just Divine Smite. Then, Peerless Athlete allowed the Glory Paladin to expend a channel divinity as a bonus action to improve their physical ability for the next 10 minutes. For the duration, they gained advantage on Strength Athletics checks and Dexterity Acrobatics checks. They could carry, push, drag, and lift twice as much, and their jump distance for both long and high jumps increased by 10 feet. The version here now lasts an hour, so that's a nice increase, and otherwise it's the same. Yet, it is still worse than the Player's Handbook version, because despite the increased duration, advantage on Strength Athletics checks meant the old version gave you advantage on checks to grapple or shove. And now with grapples and shoves being saving throws, they don't get that anymore. And that is a huge loss. That's usually what I used Peerless Athlete for when I was playing a Glory Paladin. What they could do here is they could have Peerless Athlete impose disadvantage on those saving throws against, shoves or grapples, and I think that would be fine and cool. Aura of Alacrity gave the old Glory Paladin a 10-foot improvement to their walking speed, and an ally starting its turn next to the Glory Paladin got a 10-foot movement enhancement as well. At 18th level, the ally could be within 10 feet and get the benefit. Now the ally just gets the benefit if they're in the Paladin aura, which it probably always should have been. Aura of Alacrity also works well in combination with Fine Steed, by the way, because your steed is always going to be in your aura. Glorious Defense at 15th level is identical to the Tasha's Glory Paladin. You can use your reaction when you or an ally within 10 feet is hit by an attack to get a bonus to armor class against the attack equal to your charisma modifier. And if that causes the attack to miss, then you get a free weapon attack against the attacker as long as they're within your weapon's range. You can do this a number of times equal to your charisma modifier, and this is a decent feature. And the capstone, Living Legend, hasn't changed at all. It's a bonus action, lasts a minute, can be reused with a 5th level spell slot. It gives you advantage on charisma checks, who cares, but it does. You can use a reaction to reroll any failed saving throw, that's nice. And the big one, once on each of your turns when you miss with a weapon attack, you get to hit instead. This was super nice when you combined it with the -5 to hit for +10 damage options like Great Weapon Master. Of course, those are gone now, so I don't think this is going to have quite the same impact. So I'll say it. Although there are some buffs here, there are some subtle nerfs as well. Advantage on grapples and shoves are gone. Turning Great Weapon Master attacks into hits with the capstone is gone. And because of those things, I think Glory could have gotten a little bit extra. I don't think this is terrible. I think it's fine. But Devotion got definitely better from 2014, and I'm not sure this version of the Glory Paladin is much better than the old one. Onwards to Oath of the Ancients. So the old spells are exactly the same as the 2014 version, but like with the Glory Paladin, we have a nice ritual spell eventually with Commune with Nature, which now the Paladin can cast without expending a spell slot, and so that's a little improvement. At 3rd level, the 2014 Ancients Paladin had 2 uses of Channel Divinity at level 3. They could do Turn the Faithless, which was an ability to turn Fae and Fiends. So again, we have the feature removed to avoid redundancy with Abjure foes, but also like the Devotion Paladin, it hasn't been replaced with anything. Nature's Wrath, however, was terrible for the 2014 Ancients Paladin. They would use their Channel Divinity and in action, and they got to pick one creature within 10 feet. That creature then made a strength or dexterity saving throw. They could choose whichever was better, and if they failed, they were restrained, but they got another saving throw at the end of each of their turns. Terrible. Now, each creature of your choice within 15 feet of you make a strength saving throw or are restrained with the additional saving throw at the end of each of their turns. This is obviously just much, much better. Much more creatures, set saving throw. Now, the Aura of Warding for Ancients Paladins has been a player favorite, and it has gotten a major change here. You and your allies in your aura got resistance to the damage of spells, and that was it. Now, you and your allies in the aura get resistance to necrotic, psychic, and radiant damage regardless of the source, so whether it's through a spell or something else. So I will say these resistances are not the easiest ones to get. I mean, like spells like Absorb Elements doesn't cover any of these. Protection from Poison doesn't. Protection from Energy doesn't. Fizban's Platinum Shield and Fire Shield, they don't cover these. I mean, you got Intellect Fortress, I guess, gives you psychic resistance. And if you get to 8th level spells, Mind Blank gives you immunity. But that's really about it. And I think I'm going to need to play with this for a while before I decide if it's more useful or less useful than the old version. It is very different. I mean, 3 damage resistances, that's nothing to sneeze at, even if you weren't sharing them. 3 damage resistances that you share, pretty good. I'm just not sure if it's better or worse than the old version. At 15th level, Undying Sentinel has gotten a bit of a boost. When you fall to 0 hit points, you can fall to 1 hit point instead, and then immediately regain your Paladin level times 3 hit points. So I guess that would mean that at level 15, you would drop to 0 hit points, but drop to 1 instead, and then add another 45 hit points, so you'd have 46 hit points after using this. I think I got that right. Then you can't do it again until you finish a long rest. And you don't suffer any of the drawbacks of old age. Oh, hooray. I mean, is it even a thing in D&D anymore? Are there rules for drawbacks of old age? Not that I know of. And you can't be aged magically. So this is like the old version, except with the old version, you just drop to 1 hit point. So this has been buffed a bit. Though the once per long rest thing is pretty restrictive. I'm not sure I ever considered this all that powerful for a 15th level feature, but it's a decent feature. Finally, the capstone, Elder Champion. This used to require an action, and now it's a bonus action. It was a 1 minute duration in the 2014 version as well, by the way. And same for Devotion Paladin. Both of them had capstones where basically you had to start a combat using your action to set up your capstone. Now you don't have to do that anymore. The ability to use this again with a 5th level spell slot is also new. As for the effects, there's one boost here. Diminished Defiance imposes disadvantage on saving throws against your spells and Channel Divinity options within your aura. The old version was within 10 feet. And remember, once we're 20th level, we have an aura of 30 feet. And so it's going to cover a lot more creatures, and that's a big boost. The regeneration of 10 hit points at the start of each of your turns, and the casting of 1 action spells as bonus action are both the same. With a bonus action activation, I think this is one of the best capstones. Bonus action casting plus the targets within 30 feet have disadvantage on their saving throws against those spells. Yes, please. So with Oath of Ancients, I mean, the dramatic change is the new 7th level aura. And it is really hard to kind of come up with a value of the new aura versus the old aura and compare them. But I do think the Ancients Paladin has come out ahead here. Nature's Wrath is dramatically improved at 3rd level. And whether the 7th level aura is better or worse than before, it's still good. I mean, there's 3 resistances. That's good. Undying Sentinel isn't a standout feature, but it's been improved. And the capstone, Elder Champion, is significantly improved. So I think Ancients has definitely come out ahead from the 2014 Player's Handbook version. And our final subclass is the Oath of Vengeance. And with the Oath spells, there's one change. Compelled Duel used to be Hunter's Mark. Not sure I care about that at all. The standout spells on this list for me have always been Misty Step and Dimension Door, and they're still here. So at 3rd level, the old Vengeance Paladin had Abjure Enemy, which frightened one creature that failed a saving throw, and it had disadvantage if it was a fiend, I believe. This is another feature that has essentially been replaced by Abjure Foes. Then we have Vow of Enmity. This allowed the Vengeance Paladin to mark an enemy within 10 feet as a bonus action by expending a Channel Divinity. Or, I guess, their only Channel Divinity. And then they would have advantage on attack rolls against the creature for 1 minute, which is usually way more than enough. So there are a couple enhancements here. First, the creature can be within 30 feet instead of 10 feet. And second, if you drop a creature to 0 hit points within the 1 minute duration, you can now switch the vow to another creature within 30 feet, and that doesn't require an action. So these are both nice enhancements. Though I should add that advantage in the playtest is a lot easier to get. So there's probably less value for a feature that provides advantage, because I'll tell you what, creatures are just constantly prone in this playtest. They're just prone all the time. But you know what? Still, this is solid. The 7th level Relentless Avenger feature for the 2014 Vengeance Paladin is pretty sad. If you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, you can also move half your speed without provoking an opportunity attack. Big deal. Now, it does the same thing, but it also drops the target speed to 0, which is very nice. That's why I take the Sentinel feat. And I probably wouldn't bother with a Sentinel feat on a Vengeance Paladin anymore. Soul of Vengeance at level 15, basically the same. When a creature is under your Vow of Enmity, you can make a reaction melee attack against them whenever they attack if they're within your range. Now I should actually mention this as well, if it's not obvious to people, but when it comes to reaction attacks or off-turn attacks for Paladins now, they're not going to be able to smite anymore. So it used to be, if you make a reaction attack with a Paladin, then you could apply Divine Smite to that attack if you hit. But you won't be able to do that anymore because you can't spend a bonus action when it's not your turn. So there will be no smites for Paladins now outside of their turn. And we'll see how players respond to that as well. We know how they responded to that in regards to the Rogue. So we have Avenging Angel at 20th level. So in the 2014 Player's Handbook, Avenging Angel at 20th level used the Paladin's action gave them a flying speed of 60 feet, and any creature that entered their 30-foot aura or started their turn there made a wisdom saving throw or was frightened of the Paladin for 1 minute or until it took damage, and attacks against it had advantage while it was frightened. This all lasted 1 hour, but couldn't be used again until after a long rest. So, here it is in the new playtest, and it's a bonus action to activate, but it only lasts 10 minutes. Though, note that's still 10 times longer than the other Paladin capstones. The fly speed is now equal to the Paladin speed, but it does provide hover, and the Frightful Aura is the same. Just like the other Paladin capstones, the Vengeance Paladin can use the feature again if they expend a 5th level spell slot. Now I have to say, with the cheapening of advantage in the playtest, because creatures are always prone, and Paladins are using melee attacks, so they're going to be able to get that advantage, I was a bit concerned going into the Vengeance Paladin. But you know what? I think they've added enough juice here to make up for that. Vow of Enmity being switchable is very nice. And the 7th level Relentless Avenger feature is much, much better. Avenging Angel doesn't last as long, but 10 minutes is still a pretty good duration, and the bonus action to use it and the ability to use it again using a spell slot are nice buffs. So as far as Paladin subclasses go, I'm pretty satisfied. There's no glaring issues, and there are a number of nice little cleanups and boosts. I do think Glory could use a couple more little boosts though, or at least something. Seems to me to be the weakest of the 4 presented here. But overall, pretty happy with all of them. And that's the Paladin. So, are Paladins any good? Well, let's do a quick and easy 13th level build. I think I'm just going to ignore species selection, as well as the 1st level feat selection. I'd probably take Magic Initiate to get the shield spell. I mean, that seems like a decent idea. Now, once I started thinking about building a Paladin, the first thing I noticed is that the feats that I obviously want, like Charger, Great Weapon Master, Mounted Combatant, and Shield Master, well, none of them are going to give me an option to improve my Charisma. And as a Paladin, I generally prioritize Charisma over Strength. But let's assume a starting Charisma of 17 and a starting Strength of 16. So we could go Warcaster at level 4, and that would get our Charisma to 18, and that's a feat I probably would want. And then maybe Mounted Combatant and Great Weapon Master to get that Strength to 18. And I'm going to grab a Lance with the Topple Mastery, then maybe a Battle Axe with Topple as well in case I get dismounted. Grab the Dueling Fighting Style for +2 damage, and I guess Devotion Paladin subclass. So first off, how often am I going to have advantage? Well, Mounted Combatant plus Fine Steed is going to provide it a fair amount, and Topple will also provide it a fair amount. So I have to guess here, but I'm going to say 75% of the time. I think that's as good a guess as any. Now, how often do we have Sacred Weapon? Well, I have 3 Channel Divinities, and I get 1 back after a short rest. I think I could potentially have it most of the time. I think what I'm going to do is instead of adding the +4 to hit from Sacred Weapon, I'll add +3 to account for the times that I don't have it. Now, how often do I smite? Well, I think if I crit, I should smite on the same turn. It's hard to account for all the secondary stuff with the various smite spells, so I'm just going to assume I use a 2nd level Divine Smite on a critical hit. I mean, I won't always use a 2nd level one. Sometimes I'll use 1st level. Sometimes I might use 3rd level. We'll just say 2nd level Smite as an average. So the base attack would normally be 55% chance to hit with an 18 strength. I add +3 for Sacred Weapon, and it's 70%. With advantage 75% of the time, it's going to average hitting 86% of the time. The Lance does a D10, so that's 5.5 average. Add 4.5 from Radiant Strikes. Add 4 from my Strength, and 2 from my Dueling, and that's 16 average damage. So 86% chance to hit times 16 is 13.76. Now, with the enhanced chance of advantage, but not advantage all the time, it works out to just under 9% in terms of how often I'm going to crit. So I'm just going to round to 9% times 37 additional damage if I crit, because that's what I'm smiting. So that's 3.33. And then I get 2 attacks, so that's 34.18. My chance of hitting at least once is 98%. And then if I hit at least once, I do 5 additional damage from Great Weapon Master, so that's 4.9. By the way, Lance is like your only option to actually get the benefit of Great Weapon Master while using a one-handed weapon, because it loses the two-handed property if you're mounted, but it doesn't lose the heavy property, so that's quite nice. Now, Great Weapon Master has this other bit here where if you drop a creature, you get a critical hit, then you can take a bonus action attack. Now, I've already said that if I make a critical hit, I'm going to smite. And if I smite, that's my bonus action, so I can't do a bonus action attack. Now, thinking about it, I'm not sure which is better because smiting probably would do more damage, but it would also use up a spell slot. So I'm not 100% certain, but I've already said, just for the ease of calculations, that I'm going to smite if I get a critical hit, so that's not going to come up. But the other portion here will, where if you drop a creature, I'm going to be dropping creatures, and maybe I'm going to be using my bonus action on something else. If it's round 1, maybe I did Sacred Weapon. And then if it's a different round, maybe I did a smite, and so my bonus action isn't available. I don't know. So this one's hard to guess. How often am I going to drop an enemy and not have used my bonus action? And I'm just going to take a shot in the dark. I'm going to say 20% of the time. And I think that's as good a guess as any. And it would have an 86% chance to hit, times 16 base damage, times 0.2 for 20% is another 2.75. And I'm not even going to bother adding crit damage here because it is going to be so minute. So the total DPR is 41.83, or roughly 41.83. So I've got a little DPR chart here, and I've had it up here for some of these other classes as well. And the lines are basically a Warlock using Eldritch Blast. That's my baseline. And it includes both the old and the new Warlock. And at 13th level, they're basically the same. And we can see the Berserker Barbarian is here, the Champion Fighter is here, the Assassin Rogue is here, all well above baseline. And the Devotion Paladin is actually well above baseline as well. But it is the lowest of the 4 classes I have here. Now, I don't have the Monk on here because that's just embarrassing for the Monk. They end up well below baseline. But the Devotion Paladin does less damage than these other 3 classes. And I think that's terrific. And here's why. Devotion Paladin has Aura Protection and is a half caster. They're getting lots of benefits these other classes aren't getting. At least let these other classes do more damage. And it looks, at least based on this snapshot, that they do more damage. And that's a great thing. So I'm pretty happy where the Devotion Paladin ended up here. Still very relevant damage, but not your best offensive option. So with the Playtest 4 Paladin, I believe my comments after that version were released are that I liked a lot of the features and upgrades, but I was concerned that the overall Paladin had received quite a boost mechanically that I wasn't sure it needed. And I was concerned now how class identity could be affected by providing clerics access to what previously had been Paladin spells. And I have to say, although there aren't a lot of dramatic changes here, I'm pretty happy with the package overall. There's some nice quality of life improvements here, like casting Find Steed as an action, Lay on Hands as a bonus action, and having that nice host of options available whenever I decide to deliver a smite. As a weapon-using class, Weapon Mastery is going to be appreciated. Class identity is far more protected. Most of the smite spells and the Find Steed spell have been made Paladin exclusive. Now even a Bard can't access these spells. We have 4 subclasses presented here, and I think they're all fairly balanced. They're all good enough. I mean, Glory could use a nudge or a tweak, I think, but that's more of a nitpick than an imperative. I think my biggest complaint over this entire class would be the Banishing Smite spell. It's not a good spell. And if my biggest concern on this entire thing is one of the 8 smite spells, and that one is going to be the one that's cast the least often regardless, I think that's pretty good. And there are a lot of little subtle downgrades here that temper the power of the class. The number of channel divinities has been reduced. The free oath spell casting has been removed. There's one less subclass feature. Abjure Foes has been toned down. Smiting will always require a bonus action, and that means, by the way, that you won't be smiting unless it's your turn as well. And although the Paladin is still mechanically very strong, I'm far less concerned that it's too strong. So, overall, I'm quite happy with this, but I'm curious what you think. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, until next time, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.